Here we are, Football Insiders. It is Combine Week, and you can tell something special is happening because Tony and I are sitting next to each other in the same room, something that Tony has tried to avoid for much of his time here at Pro Football Network. But we're not alone. As always, we are joined every single week by the great Trey Wingo, who is already here with us because there is a lot to talk about. Trey, how you doing?
Good, guys. Good to see both of you together in one place, and we do have a ton of stuff to get into.
We do, and let's get into it right away. Let's talk about it, our first segment of the show. Let's start off with the Los Angeles Rams. I know it's Combine Week, but a lot of what the Rams have done in the previous years has basically made the draft an irrelevant event for them. However, there are two personnel moves that could come up that maybe change things. Let's talk about that, Trey. Bobby Wagner may be on the way out, or definitely on the way out, and Jalen Ramsey may be on the way out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Rams brought everybody back to try and run it back, and instead they got run over, right? That was the sort of the theme of the 2022 season. Nothing really went right for them from the get-go. That opening Thursday night game, the champion always gets that at home, and they just were destroyed by the Buffalo Bills, and it really set the tone for the entire season. So now what do the Rams do? Well, they have Sean McVay back for at least one more year as the head coach. They have Matthew Stafford back at quarterback. So you have to believe with a caliber quarterback like that, they have an opportunity. So they're going to try and figure out a way to maximize getting that roster as good as it can be because Donald is still there and Stafford is still there. Cooper Kupp hopefully comes back from injury. So they need to find playmakers. Bobby Wagner was a one-and-done deal. He played great for them. He's gone. So what do you do with Jalen Ramsey? Well, Jalen Ramsey can give them something they haven't had in a long time, draft equity, draft capital, draft stock. And, they haven't had a first round pick since they used one in 2016 on Jared Goff. And the way they can get a first round pick back, potentially maybe even more than one first round pick, is to trade someone like Jalen Ramsey. And Jalen Ramsey is still, 28 years old. He's at the top of his game, but he gives them something that they can evaluate and get back in return, which is draft capital. It'll be the first time they've gone six straight drafts without using a first round pick. It's absolutely insane. But if they're going to try and get back into the swing of things, they're going to need to get better in a hurry and using Jalen Ramsey to get draft capital and players back, I think is a wise decision by them, even though he's one of the best cover corners in the NFL still.
Yeah. And Tony, look, Combine Week is where those conversations start to take shape, right? The Rams are ostensibly having these conversations right here, right now, here at Indianapolis. What are your thoughts as this situation unfolds?
Well, when you collect a bunch of superstars, they're eventually going to want to be paid like superstars. And
Correct.
You find yourself in salary cap hell, which is the situation now. And what happens is, when you're the Rams, and you're not just trading away first round picks, you're trading away first and second day picks. Yeah. To bring in this great talent, there's a very thin margin of error, and eventually the players that you brought in are going to want to get paid. They may have to be cut because of the salary cap, or they're just going to retire. So you don't have that player anymore, and you lost those draft picks, which you could have selected replacements for those players for the future. So, it's a very thin margin of error, which the Rams find themselves in right now. It worked for them because they won the Super Bowl, and that was the goal. So in that sense, it's worked for them. It'll be interesting to see because, as Trey pointed out, and as we've seen, this is a team that doesn't really care about the draft. For the longest time, they sent nobody to the Senior Bowl. They didn't go to any of the scouting events. I think one year, maybe it was the COVID year, their draft scene were lounge chairs out by the pool, if you remember.
Rams house, yeah.
So now if all of a sudden they're back in the draft game, it's draft capital, but these cats have been out of the game for a long. Yeah, they got Cooper Kupp, but a lot of their stuff, Aaron Donald years ago. But a lot of their mainstays have been guys that they brought in from the outside. It's not a guarantee. This is what happens when you trade away picks to bring in superstar players. Eventually, there's a price to pay.
Yeah. And Trey, correct me if I'm wrong. This regime has never been involved in the NFL draft in the first round, right? If the last pick was Jared Goff, Sean McVay has not been coaching a Rams team that's made a selection in the first round.
Correct. But it speaks to a bigger issue, right? Because look, it's not a situation for the Rams, but because they have their quarterback for the moment in Matthew Stafford. But, this is going to be another draft heavy situation with quarterbacks. it's one thing to draft a quarterback high. It's another thing to draft the right quarterback high. And that's something that we should talk about eventually. It doesn't pertain to the Rams necessarily, but that's something that needs to be discussed. But you're right. The situation they find themselves in is, okay, can we do the thing? They did the thing that nobody else was doing. They found a way to win by not using draft picks. And now it all fell apart. Now they need to see if they can do the thing that everyone else does, which is build through the draft and find things like Brett Veach did last year when he got Pacheco in the 7th round, and he took Cook in later rounds, and he got Sky Moore in the later rounds, and some of these other players that have really played well for the Chiefs in their Super Bowl run.
And the other thing is this, it's not just drafting the right quarterback, it's also developing that quarterback.
Yeah.
It's not an accident that Brock Purdy just flourished under Kyle Shanahan, because Kyle Shanahan is a tremendous quarterback coach. Now, McVay's had success with veteran quarterbacks. We could go through loads of coaches that have had success, resurrecting veterans. It's a different thing when you bring in a younger guy at a quarterback or a cornerback position and basically develop that player from scratch. So, there's a lot of variables. It'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the importance of selecting a quarterback and how hard it has been for a very long time to get a high quarterback selection right. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But before we do, we've talked about the Rams, okay, and how they kind of sold out and they got their Super Bowl. And now they're, kind of figuring out what comes next now that's all fallen apart. Trey, there's another team that is in a similar situation, facing it really for the first time this year, and that's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay, they went and got Tom Brady. He, kind of was a major factor in providing good leadership to help them attain the Super Bowl that they won. And then the last 2 years, he retired, he unretired. It was not great last year, and ostensibly he's gone for good now. We believe,
right?
We're holding out hope, but let's ask that question of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Was it all worth it? Because they're reasonably in a much worse position now than before they even brought Brady in.
Yeah, they kind of are, but I think any Bucs fan would say it was worth it because they got the chip, right? They won their second Super Bowl as a franchise. So much like the Rams that find themselves in this situation, they'd say it was worth it because they got that Lombardi Trophy that Tom almost threw into the river when taking the Super Bowl parade on avocado tequila after that championship. But they're in real trouble. Like, they're $55 million over the cap right now. They have about $40 million in dead money coming this year. And our own Adam Beasley even talked to Jason Light about it at the Combine. He basically said, what is this year going to look like? And Jason, the general manager of the Bucs, gave the traditional answer, which is, no, I don't want to tell you how bad it's going to be, but it's going to be bad. He said, well, we're just doing it a different way this year. And we're trying to figure out. That's the indication that it's going to suck. Okay. Yeah, exactly. It may not, because things might work out, but their expectations are very low going into the 2023 season. I mean, it's not just the Tom Brady situation. What are they going to do with Levante David? They just released Leonard Fournette. What's going on with Mike Evans? Mike Evans, by the way, the only receiver in the history of the NFL to start his career with 9 straight 1,000-yard receiving yards. 9 straight seasons with at least 1,000 receiving yards. That's the level we're talking about. It's not just Brady. It's Levante David. It's Mike Evans. That offensive line that was so good for them when they won their Super Bowl and made it back to the divisional round the next year, that was together. Well, Marpet retires. Alex Kappa goes to the Bengals. Jensen gets hurt. They have all kinds of injuries that they hadn't had before. Look, it's a weird division because every single team in the NFC South needs a quarterback. I mean, I get it when they say Kyle Trask is our starting quarterback. He's their only quarterback. He's the only one on the roster. Like, what are you going to say? Yeah, we have this guy, but he's no good. We're going to get some other dudes in front of him. I mean, literally at this point, he's their only option. So of course he has to be their starting quarterback. So the Bucs are going to be a very different franchise. And we saw a lot of that actually play out last year, even though they made the postseason when they won the division with a losing record. They struggled in a lot of ways. There wasn't a lot of consistency offensively. That defense was not nearly as suffocating. The Chiefs went in there, I think, week 3 or week 4 and absolutely lit them up on that Sunday night game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2023 are going to look nothing like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers of 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, typically we use the phrase that we're tearing it down to the studs, but the studs are actually what Tampa Bay is getting rid of or losing in one way or another. Thought you might like that one. Now,
That was very good.
You mentioned that one of the players that's being released in this purge is running back Leonard Fournette. But Fournette's not the only veteran running back probably looking for a new home next season, Trey. We got Joe Mixon. His future in Cincinnati is questionable at best.
Yeah.
There are other running backs also. The state of the running back market is one to really take a look at, and a lot of that's going to come into clearer focus during this week at the Combine as agents do their talking. What are your thoughts on the veteran running back scene right now?
Well, Mixon's interesting because let's start with Cincinnati first and foremost, because they're going to have to make some changes because they have to do the thing that the Chiefs have already done, which is pay Joe Burrow, right? Again, let's be clear. The Chiefs did the hardest thing to do in today's NFL. They won a Super Bowl after paying their quarterback, after paying him the big dollars. Welcome to that world, Cincinnati. So the Bengals have some issues. Samaje Perine, actually, I thought was the better running back down the stretch of the season anyway, with the way he played at a much more cost-effective number. So I think if you're trying to hang on to T. Higgins and you have to pay Joe Burrow, someone's got to go. And it looks like that might be Joe Mixon in Cincinnati. But, the running back position, and Tony can talk about this, is so fluid these days. We just talked a little bit about Isaiah Pacheco, right? Yeah. He was a leading rusher for the Chiefs, 7th rounder. Not only was he a 7th rounder, he's a hard runner that ran in the 4.3s, okay? You got him in the 7th round. Like, I think teams have to start taking – and I know Bijan Robinson is fantastic and off the charts good. But is it worth it to pay to take a running back that high, to pay him that much when you can get similar kinds of production at that position from other players that won't cost you as much? So the Bengals have to find a way to pay Joe Burrow, and I think the price may be at least Joe Mixon, potentially other players. Then there's the Dallas Cowboys, okay?
I was going to say, they're the ones paying a running back and reaping the consequences of such an action.
Yeah, Amari Cooper is no longer a Dallas Cowboy because they decided to pay Ezekiel Elliott. And the Joneses love Ezekiel Elliott, okay? Jerry and Steven, they love him. That's wonderful, but that doesn't help their franchise because they got to secure Tony Pollard, who broke his leg in the playoff loss to the 49ers, and they only had 20-plus rushing yards in the second half after he went down. Tony Pollard is the guy they've got to sign. They have to figure out a way to sign him. Zeke Elliott is a good back for the Dallas Cowboys. He's a great blitz pickup guy. He's great in short yardage. He's great at the goal line. You're not paying that guy $15, $16 million a year. Right. So there needs to be, for lack of a better term, a come to Jesus meeting between the Cowboys and Zeke Elliott about that contract. And they're either going to have to tell him you got to take a pay cut or we're going to have to let you go. And that's something that Zeke's going to have to decide, because the key for the Cowboys at the running back position is no longer Ezekiel Elliott. And it hasn't been for 2 years, quite frankly. Yeah. It's Tony Pollard. He's the explosive back. You look at the numbers when Tony Pollard gets 20 touches, what the Cowboys offense output is when he gets at least 20 touches a game, it's off the charts. Tony Pollard is the key that they have to sign for the Dallas Cowboys. And it may come at the expense of Ezekiel Elliott, but that's a problem that the Cowboys created in the way they handled their contract situations.
Yeah. And you just go back to what I reported from the Senior Bowl, if you remember.
Yep.
What we were talking about with the Cowboys, or what the talk was there about the Cowboys, was they were going to franchise Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott was going to have to take a large pay cut. It may come to the point where Ezekiel Elliott may just be cut outright. He may not have the choice to take the pay cut because, as Trey says, they got to keep Pollard. And very likely, if they can't come to a contract negotiation with him, they'll just stick the franchise tag on him because he's their player of the future. And I think what's going to happen now is, you talk about Elliott, you talk about Leonard Fournette, even Joe Mixon. These bigger downhill ball carriers are almost dinosaurs. They're still needed in short yardage situations. They're still needed in goal line situations. But I think what's going to happen is the Tyjae Spears of the world, the running back from Tulane, he's going to see his draft stock rise. Not going to be a first rounder. But, in September, when people were looking at him as a 4th or 5th rounder, he has a great season. He has a great Senior Bowl. He's probably going to have a great combine. And he's a versatile, do everything back. He's not just a downhill runner. He can turn the perimeter. He's a creative ball carrier. He's an outstanding pass catcher out of the backfield. Those guys are going to be much more valued in the draft, not first rounders, but day 2 players.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is I think, as Trey was saying too, is it seems like those are the guys that GM should be focusing on. Who can I get in the third, fourth, or fifth round, and not necessarily focus so much of my resources where I run into a situation like Dallas is in.
It also be a good system fit. It's got to fit the offensive system. Tajay Spears is that type of versatile back. He may not fit every system, and I mean, what it's going to do is just going to devalue the running back position in the draft once again, where Bijan Robinson, he's a sensational runner. He's a sensational player. And as I said last show, 25, 30 years ago, Bijan Robinson is in the conversation for the first overall pick. Now he's going to go in the 20s.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you don't even have to go back that far. In 2017, Fournette was the fourth overall pick and Christian McCaffrey was the eighth. I don't think we'll ever see that again. I don't think we'll ever see two running backs taken in the top 10 simply because of the way the game is played and the way you're going to have to manage the cap. And you've seen so mmany times year in and year out where you get value at the running back position outside of the first round. And, even the Jets last year, when Breece Hall went in the second round, he played like a first rounder until he got hurt. You can always find those guys. And I think that as good as Spears and Bijan Robinson are, I think there's a lot of things you have to think about when you consider, are you going to invest that kind of draft capital and the money that comes with investing that draft capital into the running back position?
It also, like I said, it's the fit. It's also, the Buffalo Bills think that a running back like Bijan Robinson is the final piece to push them over. If they really believe that that's the way there was a lot of talk that the Bills were going to take Breece Hall last year. They didn't take him. They took Kerry Elam, who's a darn good cornerback. When you start to get into that late, the Philadelphia Eagles have 2 first-round picks. If they think that there's a running back there, whether it be Bijan Robinson of Texas, Jahmyr Gibbs of Alabama, and it's going to basically be that final piece to give them that extra push to win the Super Bowl, I think that's what's going to happen. But those teams are drafting in the 20s. They're drafting in the bottom third of round 1. They are not drafting in the top 12 for obvious reasons, although the Eagles are because they have such a great general manager in Harry Roseman.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, coming into a year where Bijan Robinson getting all this hype, all this excitement, it could have been easy to fall into this trap of thinking that Bijan Robinson is going to reset this priority on running backs. And actually, it might be the opposite.
Yeah.
And by the way, when the Cowboys made Tony Pollard a huge emphasis of their offense, probably 3-4 weeks into the season, it took them to really get that going. They catapulted themselves into the top scoring behavior rate that I track each and every week. They were by far the top scoring offense in terms of points scored per minute of possession time. And having a playmaker like that will absolutely do that for you. Before we move on to our next segment, I do want to bring up something. As it's this is the Let's Talk About It segment. We saw something interesting from Byron Jones this week, and it is Combine week, and the tweet thread that he sort of made this declaration on was of a 2015 tweet from the NFL account hyping up his breaking of the broad jump record right here in Indianapolis at the scouting combine. And he used that opportunity to basically say, I can't do that anymore. I can't run. I can't jump. Get second opinions. The medical treatment that he personally had received, he seems to be saying is leaving him with an inability to perform at a high level. Trey, what did you make of his tweet and sort of what this maybe means for not just his future, but is this something the NFL might look at moving forward?
The NFL is not going to look at it because the NFL is a $20 billion a year industry. Okay. What Byron Jones's tweet was an attempt to reach out to players like Byron Jones himself who don't always think of the broader picture. But Byron Jones made hella money in his career. Let's just be clear about that. He signed with the Dallas Cowboys and then got a huge offer from the Miami Dolphins in free agency. So he's set for life, I believe, financially, but it cost him physically his ability to do a lot of things. He's not the first player to go down this road, and he won't be the last. And it's the decision that every player has to make. At what cost is the rest of my life? Jason Taylor, Hall of Famer Jason Taylor, has told me the story and told it a bunch of different times that before a game, he needed help to go out there and play. They take him into the bowels of old Joel Robbie Stadium, and he would bite on a towel as they shot Toradol into his feet. And Toradol comes with a huge needle. Okay, it's a painkiller basically, so he can go out there and play. And it's very similar to what Byron Jones is saying. I took these things so I could go and perform, but much in the same way that eventually the cost of trading away draft picks catches up with the Rams. The cost of doing this to your body eventually catches up with you. Byron Jones is 31, early 30s maybe. Yeah. He's played 8 years in the NFL, and he's basically saying, I can't do any of those things anymore. And it's the quandary that a lot of former players have talked about for a long time with the NFL. Eugene Monroe, the offensive lineman out of Virginia Tech, has tried to get the NFL to buy into other ways of medicating their players, basically talking about THC and marijuana instead of opioids. And I don't need to tell you or anybody else the damage that opioids have done to this country. And that's how the NFL medicates their players, through opioids and pills and shots, as opposed to other ways to try and get it done. And a lot of players smoke weed because they like it, and they also smoke weed because it helps medicate their pain and their chronic.
This thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's got a company now, Ricky Williams, called the Heisman, which is all about his brand of marijuana. There are better ways to do it, is basically what Byron Jones is saying. But he's trying to tell the Byron Joneses of this season and this next combine and combine after that, look, the money sounds great, and you're going to do it because it's going to set you up for life. But you have way more life after football than you can even think about right now. And he's putting it out there for players to have some sense of a broader view of what your life post-football is going to be like. I mean, all these kids that are at the combine, they're hyper competitive. They're uber athletic. They've been the best of the best as long as they've been playing the sport. They don't feel what Byron Jones is feeling after 8 years in the NFL. Right. And this is his way of saying, trust me, okay? Whether you think it's going to happen or not, 99% of you, this is how it's going to end. This is how it's going to happen. There are going to be things that you're going to have to deal with by playing football that 40 years down the road will still be a problem. Now, most people would sign up for that. My good friend Mark Schlereth said, look, I owe everything in my life to football, but I paid the price. I've had 29 surgeries. I've had 16 on one knee. I can't sit in one seat on an airplane because I can't extend or bend my leg one way. I have to sit on another thing. He's had back issues. He's had neck issues. He's had shoulder issues. He said it was worth it because it gave me a life. But I knew I was prepared going in. He tore his knee up the first time his ACL when he was still in college at Idaho. So, he told me that story once. I was sitting on a bed in Moscow, Idaho, thinking, what the hell am I going to do with my life? I can't play football anymore. So he sold out to get the life that he had. And all Byron Jones is doing with that tweet is saying, I don't think he regrets playing. He just wants people to know it's not all sunshine and roses, okay? The piper eventually will be paid. The NFL is the only sport where I think there's a 100% injury rate. Mm-hmm. And you just need to be aware of that and understand that. And he certainly wishes that the NFL would treat these injuries differently with different medications, but I don't know if that's ever going to change.
Well, the other thing that my takeaway was, he said, get a second opinion, get other opinions. To me, that is the biggest thing because, as Trey says, these guys make a ton of money. You got to go get outside opinions. You can't just rely on the word of one person. We see it in general life. People get second opinions on surgery and things like that. Yeah. And I think that was the big takeaway for me here is the medical training staff of the Miami Dolphins say do A, B, C, and D. Well, there may be better ways of doing it other than A, B, C, or D. And I think Jones is saying, listen, go out there and get second opinions because there may be a better way. We can talk about that a variety of different things in society today as far as medical treatments are concerned. And he's so right about that. He is absolutely so. And that's something I wondered about. These guys make a lot of money. go out and get another opinion as to what should be done, what's going to happen, how could you prevent it or slow it. It's a violent sport, and it's just going to get more violent, and the collisions are going to get worse as the players get bigger and stronger. But John's is right. Go out and get a second opinion. Don't just take what they're telling you at face value and figure everything is going to be okay. That was the big takeaway for me.
No, you're right, because they have an agenda, right? Their agenda is to put a product on the field. And I get that. I understand that. But when you're the product, you don't look at you have to look at yourself as not a product, because the team and the personnel, the medical personnel and the training staff, their job is to get you ready to play. And I understand that, and the players understand that. But as a player, you need to say to yourself, what's the best way for me to make sure that I don't hurt myself in getting myself ready to play? And when Jason told me that story, he doesn't like telling that story, by the way, because he doesn't think he's special or different than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's the amazing part of it, right? Is that he did it because, well, everybody else is doing it. And this is the way it works. And so he doesn't like to tell that story because he doesn't like it to be like, oh, look at me, poor me, what I had to do. No, I saw everybody else doing it, and I felt the responsibility to be on the field for my teammates. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. But the second opinion thing, Tony, you couldn't be more right about that. At the end of the day, you need to do what's best for you. And sometimes what the medical staff is telling you to do to get you on the field isn't always the best thing that's in your interest. And that's where that line of demarcation has to come.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this also happens at the NCAA level as well. Yeah. I've worked with players. I won't name them, but they've experienced injuries both in college and at the NFL level that were a result of bad care and improper care at the college level that then pay the price when they're pros. So this is a longstanding issue across all levels of the sport. And we'll see if hopefully the players take advice and get those second opinions.
Right. I mean, I can't tell you how many former players that I've worked with. You have these exit interviews after the season's over, and they go, "Oh, turns out you tore your labrum. We didn't see that. You're going to need off-season shoulders. Oh, you were playing the entire year with a sports hernia. We missed it. Our bad. Did you really miss it? Did you really miss it, or did you just not want to give that information out so you can get this guy playing and get on the field?" Exactly. Look at Lane Johnson. Just look at Lane Johnson this past year. I mean, look what he played with. He knew it, by the way, but he had a torn hip abductor. He went out there and sucked it up because he wanted to get back out there and got that team to a Super Bowl. So, but he had the information that he needed, and that's the most important thing. Get these players the information they need.
Yeah,
and it's even worse. It's worse on the college level because I mean. You don't want to name names, but look at all the Alabama guys under Nick Saban who have been put on the field in semifinal games and championship games with injuries when they shouldn't even be on the field. And it's really affected their next level potential. Some of these guys have had a fraction of an NFL career that they should have because of injuries they sustained that were made worse when they were put on the field when they shouldn't have been playing at all. But the coaches got to win. And the NFL has a degree of liability. The colleges, there seems to be a degree of, we don't care. And a lot of kids have through the years have had their NFL careers ruined because of that, which is really sad.
Yeah. Look, the old phrase was, "You go to Alabama, you'll leave with a ring and a surgery."
Yeah. Well, doesn't get more plain than that. All right, let's get into our second segment. Before we do, just want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Caesar Sports. You can get a risk-free betting with Caesars up to $1,250, and win or lose, that entire bet will be given back to you in a sports betting credit there at Caesar Sportsbook. In addition to the credit, you can also get 1,000 rewards points and 1,000 tier points that are only available to you at Caesar Sports. So if you haven't placed a bet yet and you're looking for somewhere to do it, Caesar Sports has to be the choice because it's risk-free for over $1,000. So make sure you check that out. Use promo code PFNCZR when you sign up at Caesar's Sportsbook. Okay, let's get into our second segment and talk about some of the things that we're hearing this week, this combine week here in Indianapolis. And maybe it's because it's in such stark contrast to last year's quarterback class. The focus is mostly on the quarterbacks, and a couple in particular. We found out that Bryce Young is not going to be throwing at this pro day. We found out that Anthony Richardson is. we're interested, or some people are interested in Bryce Young's measurements. Me personally, I think more his weight. I don't care so much about his height that much. But Trey, before we actually get into the prospects themselves and who we're looking at in this class, the NFL front office scene seems to have a problem with picking quarterbacks, at least the ones that they pick high. And you and I were discussing this pretty in depth a couple nights ago, and I was floored at the realizations we were coming to. Tell us a little bit about what you learned about recently, how how teams have missed the opportunity to get the right guy.
Yeah, this all came about when the Commanders released, as they were expected to do, Carson Wentz. So, he's going to be on if he plays this year, he's going to be on his fourth team in 4 seasons. And I was like, well, wait a minute, let's go back a little bit. Because we've had this run outside of a couple of years where quarterbacks have dominated the first round. Let's just look at the first 2 quarterbacks taken in some recent drafts, okay? 2015, the first 2 quarterbacks taken in the draft, Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota. Neither was on the team that drafted them, and both maybe on their 3rd team or 4th team by this point, heading into the 2023 season. 2016, first 2 picks, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz. Jared Goff is now with the Lions, and obviously Carson Wentz is potentially looking for work, all right? Let's go to the first 2 quarterbacks taken in the 2017 draft. Mitchell Trubisky, Patrick Mahomes. Okay, let's go to the 2018 draft. The first 2 quarterbacks taken, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold. At one point, they were both on the Carolina Panthers roster this year. And by the way, the Panthers didn't draft either one of them. And we don't know what the situation is going to be with either one of them. Of the first 2 quarterbacks taken in the draft, between 2015 to 2018, only one is still on the team that drafted him, and that's Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And you can even extrapolate it to the 2019 draft. The first overall pick is Kyler Murray. There is regret there from the Arizona Cardinals on taking that pick privately. They'll never say it publicly, but there is regret that they went down that road because of Cliff Kingsbury's infatuation with Kyler Murray. And Daniel Jones may or may not be on the New York Giants, depending on what he can find in the market. So what we have seen from 2015 to 2019 is a stunningly bad run of high quarterbacks picked and their ability to succeed with the team that drafted them. We all fall in love with this, right? Oh, we got our guy. We took him. We got, especially with the Jets. We got Darnold. No. We don't need him anymore. Now we got Zach. Well, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's go get Aaron Rodgers or find somebody else, right? You get in this spin cycle then of just drafting the same position over and over again. And guess what never gets any better? Your team. Patrick Mahomes is the only guy from 2015 through 2018 of the top 2 quarterbacks taken in the draft that is still with the team that drafted him. That is stunning. Because if you're taking a quarterback in the top 5, okay, you are thinking this is going to be my franchise guy for 10 years. That's why you make that pick. And for only one of them to stick and have any success from 2015 to 2018 is incredibly bad at just how poorly this position is drafted. And quite frankly, it's overdrafted every year.
And I would even push it out to 2020, Trey, and say that of all the quarterbacks taken through that point, Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow are the only 2 quarterbacks taken first or second at their position that you can reasonably feel good about. We could have said that about Tua maybe, but with all the health issues, we have to see where that goes. So really, in the course of a 5-6 year span, 2 guys, Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. Tony, the position
and to be fair, we're cutting this off at 2 because Josh Allen was the 3rd quarterback taken in 2018, and he's been great. And Lamar Jackson was the 5th quarterback taken in 2018. And he's either going to stay with the Baltimore Ravens or they're going to screw it up and not pay him. And Justin Herbert was the 3rd quarterback taken in 2020. But if you're one of the top 2 quarterbacks, like the way it grades out, boy, it's just been a terrible run.
But the other question that has to be answered is: are they bad quarterbacks, or is it they're also being coached poorly? It's no coincidence that Patrick Mahomes is being coached by Andy Reid, who is one of the best quarterback coaches in the league the past 25 years. Go back to what I said with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy, it's not a coincidence that Brock
was the last pick in the draft. I mean, that's luck at some point. I mean, if they thought he was that good, they would have taken. It's like Scott Pioli had this thing in his office when he was the Patriots GM, even though it was really Bill. He had the title. It was Tom Brady's draft card. And he's like, I didn't put it there to remind how smart I was. I put it there to remind how dumb I am. If he was so great, why did we wait till this pick to take him in the draft? So you're right about Brock Purdy. But I mean, like, if anybody had an inkling that they thought he could be that good, they would have taken him 6 rounds earlier.
But let me ask you something. Is Brock Purdy, is he play as well as he did at the end of last year for the 49ers if he's on another franchise?
No, absolutely not.
Is Zach Wilson as bad as he is with the New York Jets if, let's say, the San Francisco 49ers were able to trade up and get Zach Wilson? Okay,
No.
My point is that, you know, the Jets have messed up. Is it you had Adam Gase who destroyed Sam Darnold? You got LaFleur who's out because he did nothing with Zach Wilson. My point is, yes, there are a lot of poor quarterbacks drafted, but there are also a lot of really awful quarterback coaches out there. A lot of head coaches.
No, you're 100% right. You're 100% right.
It's not a coincidence that now after 3/4 of a year under Urban Meyer, now under Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence is starting to show the signs of being that franchise quarterback we all knew he could be because he's got an outstanding quarterback coach. And you talk about Carson Wentz. I mean, Carson Wentz was pretty good under Doug Peterson before he had that injury.
Yeah, he was having an MVP year then.
And things went south for him after that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Trey,
but that's actually interesting. Like the Carson Wentz thing is fascinating to me because that's why he went to Indianapolis. Frank Reich was like, I remember that guy. I can make that guy work, and still didn't work.
Yeah, and Trey, I said this to you too when we were texting about this back and forth. Is not enough time is spent talking about how dependent the quarterback position is on environment. Right, You're bringing these kids into a unique situation, telling them to go lead your franchise. You've got to make sure you've got the right things around them. I'm not just talking about wide receivers, pass catching tight ends, and running backs in an offensive line. I'm talking about the teaching system. I'm talking about who is developing them and putting them in positions to succeed. And look, the same franchises are continually picking in the top 4 or 5 picks, and you don't get rewarded for that for winning the Super Bowl. You get that when you're really bad. So
or you trade like you. It's funny we're here at the combine, and now the quarterback situation has kind of taken on a different meaning in the sense that we're here at the combine to watch prospects. The agents are talking to general managers and others about free agency. And guess who's in town? Derek Carr. And Derek Carr, as I reported on Twitter, met with the Jets contingency on Wednesday that also included owner Woody Johnson. And he's going to meet with, I believe he's also meeting, we already met with the Panthers. I think he's going to have another meeting with the Saints here. So, I mean, really, it's taken on another, I don't want to say life of its own, but you got a free agent quarterback who's going to be able to pick and choose his spots, who's here in town meeting to, as you say, figure out what is the best option for him.
Yeah, best environment for sure. All right, look, before we get to the prospects, the whole reason that we're even having this conversation, and Trey, you've pointed this out several times, the NFL, there's a 32-team league. 15, 16 teams have a question mark of some kind at the quarterback position. Another way of saying that is that almost half the league has a question mark at the game's most important position, right? Yeah. And particularly hit hard in the NFC. Over half the conference has a question. I tweeted this out not too long ago. The NFC South, they're asking themselves, who's good enough to start for us? The NFC West is asking themselves, who's healthy enough to start with to start for us? Trey, what is going on with the quarterback position in the NFL?
Well, it's the same reason why it's overdrafted, because it's so valued, right? I mean, like, literally, I'm not kidding. You could extrapolate this to even more than 15 or 16 teams if you wanted to. Let's just be clear. The entire NFC South is a quarterback mystery. The entire AFC South outside of Trevor Lawrence, now that he has Doug Peterson, is a quarterback mystery. You're hearing reports that maybe the Patriots are moving on from Mac Jones, right? We've heard that. We don't know what's going to happen with Miami, right? Yeah. In fact, you could make the case that only Buffalo in the AFC East has stability at the quarterback position. So then you look at the Commanders, who just got rid of Carson Wentz. I think they like Taylor Heineke. I think they'd like an upgrade. The Giants may or may not have Daniel Jones, so they're going to have some issues there. Geno Smith is not under contract with Seattle. We don't know what's going on in San Francisco. We've talked about how Arizona has buyer's remorse about Kyler Murray. I'm sure they'd love to try and change that. I mean, you could literally make a compelling argument that over 50% of the league would like to change their quarterback situation. It's so important. There's a reason Jalen Hurts of the Eagles and the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl, because Jalen Hurts had a hell of a season, and Patrick Mahomes is, to quote from one of my favorite movies, Almost Famous, a golden god. Okay, that's the reason they are there. Ryan Tannehill, what's going on with him? Rand Carthon made some very interesting comments, the new GM of the Titans, about how you win and get to a Super Bowl, and I'm not sure I completely agree with him, but you have to have a dude. Like, I'm trying to think of the last Super Bowl that was won with just a guy. Is it Jeff Hostetler? Super Bowl 25?
The Ravens.
Trent Dilfer.
No, was Brad Johnson in the Bucs after that?
No, you could be.
Yeah, he was Super Bowl 37. But Brad Johnson, like, he wasn't great, but he was really good for a lot of years. Like, Brad Johnson, I think, is a very underappreciated quarterback.
Sorry, Brad.
I know. I get it. Like, he's not a Hall of Famer, but like there's a tier between Hall of Famer and being a good starting quarterback, and I think Brad Johnson absolutely fits in that category.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, one team that seemingly, and I say that loosely because, by the way, before we move on to this team, the Dolphins said that their expectation is that Tua will be their starter, and I tweeted this out.
Easy to say in February. Easy to say in February, right?
The second the GM uses the word expectation, my antenna goes up as saying, so we'll see what happens there. But one team that seemingly has answered this question is the Chicago Bears. And Tony, we talked a little bit about this. The Chicago Bears seemingly are committing to Justin Fields. They are putting the number 1 pick up for sale. This was relatively expected, but what are your thoughts on this?
Well, are they committing to Justin Fields, or they figure any quarterback in this year's draft is just going to be a roll of the dice? If Celeb Williams of USC was available in this draft, they'd get rid of Justin Fields or fire sale, and they take Celeb Williams. I think it's more that, are they sold on Justin Fields? Well, they're probably more sold on Justin Fields than the Bryce Young, CJ Stroud starting all over. I mean, Justin Fields, he's a running back who dabbles in passing. When you really get down to it, some of the things that we reported that he struggles seeing the field, we're seeing that now. So I think it's more that they're just not infatuated with any of the quarterbacks here. As far as, moving the first pick, that was known. Are they going to be able to move that first pick? Is there going to be any team that wants to come up, from one of those players?
The answer is absolutely yes, because like we just said, a quarterback is a thirst trap photo you put on Instagram. Okay, you are just trying to. That's what it is.
Clip that, and post it somewhere. That's on a T-shirt.
A quarterback in the NFL is a thirst trap photo on Instagram or a thirst trap TikTok video. Okay. Oh, I gotta have that. And we just talked about half the league needs one of those guys. They're going to be able to move that pick. Absolutely. And Tony, you're right. There are some concerns. But if you're the Bears, he's your best quarterback since Sid Luckman, okay, in the 40s. You have to try to do what the Bills were able to do around Josh Allen. Because Josh's first 2 years, his accuracy was okay. It wasn't great. And then they got him dudes, whether it was John Brown to begin with, which eventually turned into Stephon Diggs, and they drafted Dawson Knox, and they got Gabe Davis. The Bears would be doing franchise-destroying moves if they just drafted another quarterback and moved on from Justin Fields. You have something that on some semblance is working. In a division, by the way, where you could make an arguable case that the Lions might be the best team going into 2023 in the NFC North, which means that division is in play. I get it. Minnesota had a great run this year, but there are a lot of questions about Minnesota and who they're going to be able to bring back, because they're going to have to manipulate some stuff. Yeah. And, oh, by the way, they were one and done in the postseason anyway. So you have something that's working. Why don't we see if we can surround the thing that's working with other things that might work? Because if you do the other thing where you just move on from him, you're the Jets, okay? That's who you become. You're the frickin' Jets. And you have something. You need to build around it to give it time to see if it can be something more than what it is right now. Because the Bears receivers were terrible last year. They were terrible. And a lot of that was Justin Fields had to do whatever he felt like he needed to do. And we need to see if they can surround Justin Fields with talent that will make the things that you've talked about that he isn't seeing, make him see those things better.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see how that plays out. I think Tony's point about maybe, they're not sold on a quarterback this year because, Trey, if they take a quarterback this year, they're in the same problem, which is kind of what you're saying, right? Like
lather, rinse, repeat.
There's no one. They're not. If they draft a quarterback, they're still not putting anyone around them. That quarterback's still going to be in a disadvantageous environment. But look, let's do this. Let's talk about some of these quarterback prospects that are coming out this year because it's funny. On the one hand, we're saying that none of them really stand out as this is a guy that we can definitely build around. But I think we would all agree this is light years better than last year's class. Yeah. So, Tony, let me ask you this. Let's start with Bryce Young because Bryce Young is largely considered to be, if not the best, the second best quarterback prospect in the class. There's concerns about his measurements, we call them, plus the fact that he's not throwing at the combine. So what are your thoughts on Bryce Young and all of those things that are surrounding him?
Well, first, I think it's a mistake not to throw at the combine because the combine workouts for quarterbacks are completely different. I mean, they usually throw in Lucas Oil Stadium, which none of them have played in, and they're throwing to receivers that they basically met 48 hours ago. It's not like these guys have been practicing. So if you go to the combine and you have a great passing workout, I mean, that is a major feather in your cap, if you're allowed to say it these days. That's something major. Scouts like that because of the situation. Now, some breaking news. Everyone thinks that Bryce Young is going to work out at his Alabama Pro Day. I'm told Bryce Young is deciding whether to work out at the Alabama Pro Day. He may have his own Pro Day the end of March in California. He is a West Coast guy, and the word is out there. He may bypass the Alabama Pro Day. We'll see if he's asked about this on Friday when he's interviewed, when he gets in front of the media. He may bypass the Alabama Pro Day and have his own singular Pro Day late at the end of March in California. I know that Alabama is really pressing him to get him to work out at the Pro Day because the Pro Days now
that's interesting.
Big recruiting tool for these schools. But if he goes out to the West Coast, he's going to be able to use the USC receivers. Use Jake Bobo of UCLA, who's here at the combine. Alabama, they don't have any receivers anymore. I mean, all those guys, Jameis Winston, John Mechie, they're in the NFL right now. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think when you get an opportunity like this, you've got to take advantage of it, especially if you're not injured. And I think it's a mistake because even if he doesn't throw all that well at the combine, you can back it up with the Pro Day at Alabama or a Pro Day workout. We talk about his weight, and the weight is important. But the other thing, the other reason that the weigh-ins are important is teams will look at his frame and say, can he add 10 to 15 pounds over the next year or two? And is he going to be able to play at that, higher weight, or is he just going to be a stiff guy? Mm-hmm. So you talked about the weight, and you're right, but it's also the frame, and can that frame add more weight with Bryce Young? Overall, it'll be interesting to see when he is interviewed on Friday, what he says, if anybody asks him about the Alabama Pro Day. But I think it's a mistake he should have thrown here.
Well, here's what I'll say. I don't think whether he throws or not is going to affect him one way or the other. Like, we have two conflicting agendas when we get to the combine, right? And in this whole process, whether it's pro days or workouts and meeting with teams and all that kind of stuff, they're conflicting agendas. The player and the player's representative, so Bryce Young and his people, it's their job to maximize his value and to do nothing to diminish his value. For the teams, they're always trying to find ways to bring something down so they can get that player at a lower cost. So we have conflicting agendas here, right? It's not something that happens in a vacuum. Like Christian McCaffrey didn't do a bunch of stuff at the combine, worked out fine for him. I would always like to see all these guys throw, but at the end of the day, I also respect the fact that I understand what they're doing. Their job is to maximize their value. And if they believe that, like you said, check the tape. The tape is there. I'll put on 10 to 15 pounds, whatever. But the dog and pony show sometimes doesn't help. And if you're a player, all you want to do is maximize your value, because the higher your value, the higher your draft pick, the more money you're going to make up front. And we just talked about this with Byron Jones. It's 100% injury rate league, okay? It is your job, whether it's a player or a player's agent, to maximize your value. That's the only thing that should matter. That's the only thing that these players should be focused on. Teams have a different opinion. Trey Smith in the 6th round because of a medical. That's a steal for the Kansas City Chiefs, an absolute mauler on that offensive line. So you have teams that are trying to find things that might devalue a player so they can get him somewhere else where they thought they would have to get him. And the player's opinion and the player's complete agenda is to maximize their value. So these two things are always conflicting. And more recently, over the last few years, we've seen players understanding that and realizing the value that they have and the power that they have. Whether Bryce throws or not at the draft, I don't think it's going to affect his stock one way or the other.
And let me take the third perspective here, which you had mentioned, is Alabama is reportedly pressing him to throw at their pro day. I was at TCU's pro day back in 2019, and Kenny Hill, who you guys will remember, was an assistant coach, a grad assistant on that staff, and he was the one throwing to receivers. And we were all sitting there going, "Oh my God, he is making it impossible for any of these receivers to get drafted." And that could be Alabama's motivation to get Bryce Young there. Is, hey, more guys that get drafted from Alabama, the better for us.
Tony's 100% right. The pro day now has become more about the school than the player.
Correct.
Okay, it is look at all these prospects that are here. Look at all this. The Johnny Manziel pro day when he came out in camo shorts and there was music and George Whitfield was hitting him with a broom and a swim noodle. What the hell was that?
And there was a former president of the United States there.
Former President George Bush was there. Yeah. I mean, it's just it becomes.
You know who really started this, and I was talking to him, was Pete Carroll back in the day at USC. The USC Pro Day was always the last one on the schedule. It was like the first Sunday in April, and Pete Carroll, it was like a carnival atmosphere there. He'd have the recruits there. The fans would be there. They would announce the times of the 40s and everything else over the. I mean, it was one massive. It was like a carnival. And that is what really started to turn, the pro day is like the combine in the sense that the combine used to be locked down. The pro days were locked down. Now they're using it as a tool. The league is marketing the combine, commercializing it. The schools are using it as a tool to say, hey, look, forget all these prospects. Look at all these teams. We've got 32 teams from the NFL who are here watching our players. You want to be a part of that.
Yeah. It's a great point. If anyone can find a way to make money and turn something into an event, they will. By the way, I'm hosting a pro day. If anyone would like to come check that out and give me some money to
for what?
I haven't figured that part out.
Nachos?
I'm just getting into the business. All right, it's a startup pro day business.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, now before we close the show, there is one other prospect that I do want to talk about because I think he is sort of. From what I've been able to make heads or tails of, sort of the wild card quarterback prospect in this class. You've got Stroud, you've got Young. To a certain degree, you've got Will Levis being talked about. But there's this wild card aspect to Anthony Richardson. And I would love to get both of your thoughts on this because he is going to throw at the Combine this week. And Tony, where do you have him sort of rated in your QB class? And what are you expecting from him?
Right now, he's rated as my 5th quarterback.
5th quarterback.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the fact is this. Anthony Richardson, good for him. He's planning to throw here. Anthony Richardson, the pro day is made for Anthony Richardson. He's a big athletic guy with a huge arm, and he should be able to have an outstanding pro day. The conversation doesn't end with Anthony Richardson's pro day. I mean, he hasn't started. He started, 2 years at Florida, never played great at Florida, never carried that team on his shoulders, lost to Vanderbilt last year, lost to Florida State when he completed 33%. We know that Anthony Richardson has got the physical skills, has got the body, the arm strength, the athleticism to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. The question for teams is, when will he be able to start in the NFL? Because it's a situation where even if he has the best pro day of any quarterback here, if you put him behind center or behind on the field the first week of September in 2023, and he's not ready, you could kill his career. That is the big conversation with Anthony Richardson moving forward.
Yeah,
and Tony, those are great points. And real quickly, just to back up, the Combine is made for a guy like Anthony Richardson. Okay, like he needs the Combine. Bryce Young doesn't need the Combine. right? Bryce Young can say, here it is. You guys do with it what you want. Richardson and there are other guys where the combine is extremely valuable to them because it is a chance for them to showcase in a way that they may not be thinking about. So there is a sliding scale. Like the top guys at any position, I'm not sure how much value the combine gives them. They give value to the combine. But for a guy like Richardson, there is real value in going out there and doing all the drills in the combine. It's not the same for everybody. It's not, Jimmy Johnson, when he was the coach of the Cowboys, used to say, I'm going to treat everybody fairly, but I won't treat everybody the same. And that's the way the combine is. Some guys need this opportunity. Other guys can do what they want with this because their resume is already what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that more and more as players show up just for the interview process, right?
Yeah.
And don't do anything else. So before we head out, there is one last topic I want to talk about because we were talking about all these quarterbacks, but maybe the player who's gotten the most conversation for being the number one overall pick isn't a quarterback. It's been defensive tackle Jalen Carter out of Georgia. It's been reported that there is an arrest warrant out for him related to reckless driving and racing. It is all but certain that he will be arrested on those charges. The conversation I want to have here is, what does this mean for his draft stock? Because he is considered to be the favorite to be the number one overall pick, certainly has the talent to be the number one overall pick. Trey, you have called many a draft where we have seen some of these revelations come through that push a lot of guys down. I mean, we can, you and I spoke at length with Mike Tannenbaum about the night that Laramie Tunsil's bong mask photo came out the night of the draft. I'd love to get your thoughts on this and as it relates to Jalen Carter's draft prospects.
Well, listen, there's, like we said, there's always a sliding scale, right? And the more talented someone thinks you are, the more they're willing to put up with. But now we're talking about a situation where he was involved in something where a couple of people died. And there are going to be some real hard questions that need to be asked. And there were some concerns about Jalen Carter's maturity before this. I think we've all heard that. It's not that he's a bad guy, but he's a little underdeveloped in the maturity aspect.
Naive.
And now, if these allegations of what happened regarding this arrest come true, there can be some serious ramifications for this. Okay. The Bulldog program was already reeling from those deaths on it was January 15th. Mm-hmm. And now to find out that somebody else was involved in it is devastating. This is going to affect how people think about him. There's no question about it. And he's going to have to be pretty open and honest about it. And in a way that he probably has never had to deal with in his life. And it's going to be a real test to see which teams hold him accountable and how accountable he now will hold himself, because the talent is there. And this, Tony, as well as anybody else, there's always a coach that'll say, I can work with that. There's always going to be that guy.
Two things, he has to be open and honest, but that's not the reports we're getting. They're saying that part of the problem is when police asked him about it, his story was shifting, which is going to be a problem with teams. The big thing is this going to be over by draft day? Because if you remember the situation with Lael Collins,
I was just about to bring that up. I'm so glad you did.
Yeah, he was never arrested for anything. Police just wanted to talk to him about a situation in which someone was murdered, and there were text messages on his phone. And he went from a guy that could have been a first round, at worst a second round pick, wasn't even selected because of the unknown. So there's a very good chance that if we get here at draft weekend and Jalen Carter is still going through the legal process, and this has not been decided or figured out what's going to happen with Jalen Carter is going to drop, because if Jalen Carter is indicted, he's not going to help anybody if he's in a prison cell. If it comes to that, the unknown will kill a prospect's draft stock worse than anything. The unknown about a medical, the unknown about a legal situation. That's where we are today with Jalen Carter. If it's not figured out by draft weekend, boom, he's going to drop.
Let's remove some of the specificity here. I want to ask a little bit about the process, because Jalen Carter is here at the Combine. Right. He has already gone through interviews with teams. Right. He was scheduled to have more interviews with teams as the week progressed. What does something like this do to that interview process? Are teams now who have already interviewed him, are they like first online with the agent saying, I need to talk to this guy again? Or what's the process?
Well, no, the process here is I think teams are allowed 45 interviews. Jalen Carter's an underclass, so he was not at the Senior Bowl. So he's probably going to be interviewed by a lot of teams. Now, what's going to happen is if I'm Jalen Carter's agent and I'm going to say if a team asks you about this, say it's an ongoing investigation, I can't answer about it. And that's probably what's going to happen, because it is an ongoing investigation. So, I mean, teams that have already interviewed him cannot interview him again. Not here in Indianapolis. They can go to the Georgia Pro Day, or if he has his other, his own Pro Day. But they're not going to get another bite of the apple to interview Jalen Carter if they interviewed him yesterday and the story broke today.
This is now really on Jalen Carter's reps more than anything else. Like they have to. This is now like if Jalen Carter talks to anyone, I would be shocked at this point. Because now this is why you hire these people, these PR guys, your agents, your marketing guys. This is now their baby. It's their responsibility. And quite frankly, Jalen should be only talking to one group of people, the authorities. He shouldn't be talking to anybody else. And that's the best way for this to be handled.
Yeah, and once again, just reports that Jalen Carter facing an arrest warrant out of Georgia for a reckless driving and racing charge stemming from events that left 2 people dead following the national championship game this past year in January. So we will see what, if any, effects this will have on the NFL draft moving forward. We are here at the NFL Combine. Tony and the rest of the Pro Football Network team will be bringing you updates as they come with every storyline happening here in Indianapolis. We all will be back next week as we take on the next chapter of NFL's ever-long draft season. I'm Brett Yarris, Trey Wingo, Tony Pauline. We'll see you guys next week.